r/AskReddit, has anyone been to zoos that were documented on Tiger King? What were they like? Was there any indication of the crazy stuff that was in the documentary series? I went to the GW park about 8 years ago. Had no indication of all the crazy stuff going on because they do such a good job of billing it as a rescue. Plus I have been telling everyone since they should go because I got to play with baby tigers, which I now feel horrible about. This is basically what all my friends who visited the park said. Some even saw or met Joe and mentioned he came across more as a charismatic showman that loved animals. I think he really did start out that way, but things just went downhill and he lost it. My friend went to Doc Zoo in Myrtle Beach and said it seems really nice, which isn't surprising. He said there were only a few cats there, so he was shocked to hear how many Doc actually has there and wondered where the rest of them were kept. Not quite the same, but I lived in Zindersville, Ohio when all those animals were released a few years back. Some of the schools shut down and everyone was pretty scared. My grandpa was actually friends with Terry Thompson, the guy who owned the animals and released them. From what my grandma says, Terry seemed perfectly sane and cared for the animals a lot, so she's always wondered why he would release them. Oh, and Terry also committed suicide after releasing the animals. They skipped over that part in the show and imply he was arrested, but I'm pretty sure he died on his farm. Joe Exotic actually wrote a song about Terry. My grandma sent it to me on YouTube a few weeks back, and that's when I first heard about Joe's crazy ass. When I was 19, I was driving from New Jersey to Florida with some friends. We stopped at a department store on the way for supplies. There were these two rednecks in the parking lot with two ligers. One was passed out on a table and one was in a really rinky looking wire cage. The rednecks let us pet the ligers and take our pictures for $5 each. At the time, I thought it was really weird, but I figured they must have been educated and trained to handle big cats, because not any idiot could just buy a tiger or lion or whatever. Come to find out, any idiot can buy a lion or tiger or whatever. Those poor cats are probably long dead by now. I've been to Myrtle Beach Safari. It comes across as a great place, and they do a skillful job convincing you that they're doing good things. Weirdly, one of the only things that really raised a red flag for me was the way the women were done up. A lot of short shorts and makeup. It felt kind of weird that there was this obvious attempt at sex appeal, like I was being sold something, rather than participating in a wholesome venture. I actually looked into applying for a job there anyway, because I was kind of at a rather directionless juncture in my life. I remember there were some weird requirements, like you needed to watch The Devil Wears Prada before applying. The only reason I didn't follow through was because I would have had to give up my own cat. I've been to Doc Andel's place in Myrtle Beach. I got the same vibe there that I did when I did one of those dolphin photo ops in Mexico. Slimy. It was very quick and depressing. They moved the cat every 2 seconds to accommodate for all the people and felt like maybe the cats were drugged. Very lethargic and just plain sad. Once I saw Tiger King, I knew that I was right with my vibes. Apparently that place got raided recently. A lot of these places do drug the animals to make them easier to handle for public petting. I've been to the Wildlife in Need Park in southern Indiana. It was advertised as a wildlife reserve / educational type place and basically was a trailer park full of exotic animals. It was so upsetting and not at all okay. I wasn't surprised at all to see Tim Stark pop up on the show. He's been in loads of trouble in Indiana for animal cruelty and probably saw helping Jeff Lowe with the park in Oklahoma as his way out. A friend took me there years ago for the cub playtime. I did not see much of the park as we were inside a building the entire time. The employees, including Tim Stark, explained that they were breeders for zoos and they wanted young animals introduced to people so they were easier for medical staff to work with. I had never heard of this place before and did not think much of it. I found out later they were lying, and Tim is pretty much an animal hoarder pumping out baby tigers and lions to pay for it. I feel bad for not asking questions before. I haven't been to the ones featured in Tiger King, but growing up there was one near me in California that had cub petting and other things. It closed down in a spectacular, in the worst way, shitshow when the rescue and the owner's home were raided, and they found dozens of dead lions and tigers buried in shallow graves, malnourished animals, and dead cubs stuffed into freezers. I was pretty young and my guess is the animals they displayed for the public were the healthy ones, because I don't remember them looking sick or malnourished, but my mom refused to ever go back after our single visit, so she probably noticed things I didn't as a kid. After that experience I just assume 99% of rescues and zoos that are not properly accredited are like that. The doc spends basically an entire episode talking about how the cubs are the only profitable part of tiger rescue and that once they reach 3 to 6 months they just become a paycheck. I like they allude to Doc getting rid of his adult cats in much the way you described this place, just that no one has any proof of it. I went to GW back in 2014, since I was stationed nearby. I do remember seeing Joe Exotic and thinking he was a weird dude. But as for the park, there was no indication to all the crazy stuff going on. I did think the monkey cages were pretty shitty and felt bad for them. I was too cheap to pet the cubs so at least I don't have to feel guilty about that, and I'm glad I didn't eat anything from the zoo. No pizza, huh? Something tells me he was not making it from scratch. Okie here. A lot of my friends went to the GW park and some even saw or met Joe. They all said basically the same things. The park was nice. There wasn't anything nutty outside of the fact there's wild animals, and Joe did not come across as crazy, but instead a conservationist who loved animals. Something the doc doesn't really touch on is the location of the zoo, which is strategically located right off I-35 and between Dallas and Oklahoma City. What is strategic about the location? It catches people driving between the big cities. Funny enough, Carol Baskin's Big Cat Rescue is about 15 minutes from me. I used to live right next to Nebraska Avenue. Honestly, I've never been to Big Cat Rescue, but trust me, the shit you see in Tampa sometimes shades what others might consider crazy stuff. So IDK, maybe some crazy shit was going down, but that's just a typical day. PS, no one simply takes a stroll down Nebraska Avenue at night. Not a thing. I visited it 5 years ago. Shit was wild. I worked in the oil field in Lindsay, Oklahoma, about 45 minutes away from the zoo. My girlfriend came down from Oklahoma City one weekend, and I thought, hey, let's go to the one interesting thing in a 50-mile radius of BFE, Oklahoma. What amazed me the most was how close you could get to the animals. The Oklahoma City Zoo has trenches between you and the animals, and most of the time the animals are in the back sleeping. Not here. If you wanted to stick your arm through the cage, you could do it. Here is a short list of the things I saw. A lion letting out a massive roar when given a 5-gallon bucket of raw chicken. A very cute codamundi, however you spell that. An anxious pacing lynx who looked really sad. Tons of tropical birds you could feed. A half-assed reptile house. Lots of signs decrying PETA for terrorism. The fact that some of the zookeepers were fucking armed with pistols. The absolute best thing I remember, which wasn't mentioned in the documentary, was the cursing parrot. If you stopped feeding him, he would let out a raw "what fuck you." Had me in stitches laughing. I have been telling people about this crazy place for 5 years and feel completely vindicated. Not any of those places, but we do have a large cat rescue here in Jax. It's a very similar setup to what was seen in the document. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but now I'm wondering just what kind of crazy shit goes on behind the scenes. My understanding is that most exotic/large wild animal non-profit rescues and sanctuaries are on the level, and most operate similar to BCR. A few employees supplemented by a lot of volunteers. There are a few near my parents' place in Indiana and they have a good rep with the community. My parents have picked up and delivered a couple recently hit deer for a large exotic sanctuary and had volunteers from a raptor rescue out to their farm to fish the pond. I have been to BCR in Tampa. Though the cats were beautiful, I did not enjoy it. For the tour we were required to listen to pre-recorded info, mostly consisting of horrible stories of animal abuse. The guide was unenthusiastic. The whole vibe was depressing. At the end, they pressure visitors to make calls/emails about legislation. There's already a kiosk set up to do so. Not a fan. I went when I was 10 and got the same vibe. They pressured me into using my allowance money to sponsor a lynx. My mom asked me if I really wanted to do it, but since I was in front of the volunteers expectantly looking at me, I couldn't say no. 15 years later my parents still get the damn newsletters in the mail asking for donations. Wow, finally a question I can answer. I went to the one in Winewood probably close to 10 years ago now. I had gone camping with some friends the night before, and it was unseasonably cold, so I barely slept, and was in a shitty mood, and didn't want to go at all. I was skeptical of all the animals crammed into tiny cages, and didn't really buy the whole rescue bullshit. The guide made some remark about how he'd rather be living in a cage than dead, and I was looking at the tiger in a tiny cage and thinking, I'd rather be dead. They did have a baby white tiger you could pose with, but I was too cheap and irritable to do it. I went to a monkey rescue once. We only went because of a gruppen. It was awful. The enclosures were not nearly big enough, and the animals all seemed really sad. The place was a dump. I went to big cat rescue with a veterinary charity that my mom and stepdad volunteer for, and got a private tour of the facilities by Carol Baskins. She's a sweet woman, and they have a lot of land. The cats are in what you see as a small space because the toys and food are there to attract them to the front so you can see them. They actually have tons of room to roam. And the most impressive thing I saw were these huge refrigerated buildings full of fresh meat for the cats. They're a legit rescue. Otherwise my stepdad wouldn't have volunteered his services. He's very into big cats and only helps places that are really trying to help the animals. I've been to the Greater Winewood one in Oklahoma when we were driving back from Texas and saw a sign leading to it. This was 2016, maybe 2015. I'm shocked at how many people think it's a nice place. It was a horrible sad experience to me. First, you walk into the little gift shop where you pay your entrance. It reeked of smoke and had signs all over advertising Joe Exotic running for governor as well as threats not to touch merchandise unless purchasing. There was also a TV playing Joe's music videos. Once you walk out to the park, the smell is terrible and can only be described as feces and death. The animals are all in cages far too small and close to each other. Anything from bears, monkeys, and tigers. The tigers were pacing back and forth in cages far too small. They had no water and looked hungry. You could go right up to the cages, and there were signs saying the park isn't responsible for the tigers peeing on you. You could get very close to the animals and there was no one supervising, so it didn't seem safe for the animals or humans. The animals all looked miserable to me also. Oh, and there was a small grave marker on the property for Joe's ex-husband. Signs against Peter were all over too. I'm shocked by how many people thought it would be a good idea to go somewhere that offers the opportunity to touch wild animals. That's like the #1 red flag for animal cruelty. Never support companies that allow you to touch wild cats. My family knew Joe and his staff from 2010 to 2012. Joe talked about Carol to us, talked about how Peter was out to get him. They were having some mysterious cub deaths and re-inked autopsies on his kitchen counter, which was definitely a sign. I was 10 years old, and they had me stay after hours and help feed the big cats by throwing live chickens into their enclosures. I thought it was awesome, but looking back it was definitely not legal or ethical. I was also allowed to pet multiple adult cats. There was a white lion named Casper I loved. Overall, I knew they were an unusual rescue, but I don't doubt that the staff cared about the animals. My best friend interned at Big Cat Rescue one summer a few years ago. She was upset with how the documentary made the sanctuary seem no better than the cub petting zoos, as if they were hypocrites. Also, she said Carol was the sweetest lady ever and does not understand the hype around accusing Carol of killing her husband. I went to Doc Antle's Tigers place in Myrtle Beach when I was in high school. Got a picture made of me bottle feeding one of the tiger cubs. It was about 7 years ago, so I don't remember a whole lot about any craziness. I was also super into tigers at the time, so I was so excited I didn't care. My mom paid an obscene amount of money for that photo though. When I saw his place show up on Tiger King, my jaw dropped. I had no idea all that harem shit was going on behind the scenes. And now I wonder if the tiger I posed with was euthanized shortly after the photo. It was a bit older than other cubs people have had photos with. I wish I remembered more details about the insanity, but sadly I don't. just overpriced photos and long lines. I used to go to Lion Country Safari, which was mentioned briefly in the document. It's zoo that you drive around in, and the animals come close to your car. I loved it as a kid, and have a ton of really good family memories about it. I went later on as an older teenager, and it was quite sad. Everything was kinda dingy and broken down, and the animals didn't look happy. IDK if it was always that bad, or had declined in quality. A buddy of mine interviewed Carol a while before this documentary came out. He could confirm she was weird as hell. Florida has a lot of weird zoos and sanctuaries. Lion Country Safari, Big Cat Rescue, the Elephant Sanctuary, Weeki Wachee, Gatorland, the Alligator Farm, Miami Seaquarium, f***ing SeaWorld. There's also a lot of exotic game hunting areas. It's not unusual to see zebra on the side of the interstate outside of Ocala. I think I'm too late for people to see this, but I have been to Big Cat Rescue, Carol Baskin's Sanctuary, in Tampa many times. It was my favorite place to go as a child. It is absolutely nothing like how it was portrayed in Tiger King, and that has been making me so sad for the past several days after watching the show. The cats there are treated so nicely. The reason you can go on a tour and not see all of them is because they are in huge cages with lots of hiding spots and aren't being paraded around like it's a circus. Also, the volunteers appeared to love their jobs. I'm not sure why Carol was getting shit on for not paying them. They seem to love it, and BCR is a non-profit with amazing accolades, so it's not like it's a scam. Willing to answer any questions anyone has. About 5 years ago I went to Jungle Island in Miami. My BF/now husband took me for my birthday, and it seemed like a regular zoo, totally on the up and up. But I was pretty surprised when we rounded a corner and came to the big cat exhibit. The whole zoo is on a tiny island in the bay, and I told my husband I don't see how they could possibly have enough space for big cats. I've also seen some of the roadside places they have down in the Everglades, where there are cats and other animals kept in cages. It was really sad, but people line up and pay to see them. Seems like you reached the end of this video. Please like and subscribe for more, you magnificent human being.